Well, it's 8:01. I didn't start right on time. I apologize for that. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for joining us for tonight's book club. We have two fabulous authors with us, Renee Bess and Annette Mori, and we're going to talk about anthologies. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. It's going to be a little sloppy, but you'll eventually see it. That has the two book covers somewhere. Standing by. Okay, here it goes. And share screen. Let's see if we got it. Nope, we don't. Here it's coming. There it is. Can we see it now? Yep, Renee. And
yes.
That's great. Okay.
Yep, I can see it.
These are the two anthologies we'll be talking about. Let me do quick introductions of Annette and Renee. Let's start with Renee Bess, who is a former teacher, began writing in earnest after her short story At the Beauty Parlor won first place in a Philadelphia area literary contest. Her novels, Leave of Absence, Breaking J, Rebuilding Sasha, The Butterfly Moments and the Rules were published by Regal Press Enterprises, and they explore the genres of romance, romance with intrigue, and general dramatic fiction. Renee and Lee Lynch co-curated Our Happy Hours, LGBT Voices from the Gay Bars, an anthology of short fiction, memoirs, and poetry, which won the Golden Crown Literary Society's 2018 Anthology Award. Renee is so proud to be one of 4 recipients also of the 2019 Alice B. Readers Award. Renee's newest work, Between a Rock and a Soft Place, will be published by Flashpoint Publications. We'll ask her about the publication date later in this hour. Renee remains committed to writing stories that include diverse characters, cogent social themes, and well-crafted language. Annette Mori is an award-winning author published by Affinity Rainbow Publications who lives in the beautiful Pacific Northwest with her wife and their 5 furry kids. With 20 published novels, multiple Les Fick Bard Awards, and 1 Goldie Award for her 4th novel, Locked Inside, Annette says she finally feels like a real author. Annette is as much a reader as a writer and always looking for the next Les Fick novel to queue up. She came up with the 1 fan at a time tagline because it rolled off the tongue much better than 1 reader at a time. After pondering who she was at her core, it was all about connecting to each reader on a personal level. She would be the first to admit she doesn't do well with the masses. If someone picks up her book and it touches them, she believes she has achieved what she wants with her writing by reaching each reader. It is who she is at her core. So let me get our authors back in view by doing something here. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. And there they are. Thanks everybody for joining us. So let's jump right into the conversation, which is going to be about anthologies. You both have pretty expansive work with anthologies. The Gay Bars anthology, Renee, was one in which you both had short stories and you served as co-editor and co-curator, I think you call yourself, B. Lynch. And Annette, you have been involved in at least 2 anthologies. More than that?
Oh yeah, a few more, just a few more, yeah.
Yeah. So you both enjoy and have your own distinct voice in writing your novels, which are really kind of blended novels. They're not, not defined to one genre. Tell me about your experience writing in collaboration with other authors and anthology. Annette, you've actually co-written books with other authors. Talk to me about that experience.
Yeah, Allie Spooner is my favorite co-writer. We've figured out a way to write and keep our voices separate, yet meld them together. The first co-written book that we did, Free to Love, the first story was hers, the second story was mine, and we brought the characters together. And so we joined the 2 stories through characters that were overlapping in the 2 stories. And then after that, we decided to take a different tact. And we wrote a story where she did the first book in the trilogy, we think it might be more than a trilogy now since we were having fun with it. I wrote the second book, and the third book we decided to each write first person and take a character and bring the two characters together using the separate voices. So anybody who knows my style and knows her style can easily pick up on who's
doing what. Okay.
I'm the goofy character.
That's good. That's
He's
great.
Allie's the more mature character.
It's good to have a little yin yang going on there, I think. Yeah. Renee, in the Happy Hours book, since you wore a couple of hats, and I want to talk to you about process a little later, what was it like to write for the anthology, kind of knowing it was your brainchild, and you invited Lee to be part of that? What were you after in terms of your voice as you wrote the stories that are there?
Good question. Because I'd written the short story prior to having the idea to have the anthology. I think I was depending upon my ability to organize and to organize stories, poetry, etc. And that was sort of the fun part for me, to just lay everything out on my dining room table and decide what would naturally flow into the next piece. In terms of writing, my own writing, I don't know that I had any experience that was different because it was writing for an anthology than writing a novel, let's say, or writing a collection of short stories.
Okay. So what we do here at the book club is pretty early in our session. We ask if the author will do a reading for us. So I'm going to ask both of you to read. Annette, if we can start with you. I think you're going to read from a different anthology.
I am.
That's a great one. Finalist for a Goldie Award in Anthologies in 2017.
Okay.
So go ahead, give us a reading and we'll listen in.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read my short called The 40-Year-Old Virgin. And I'm just going to start and not give you any background. I shuffled my feet along the carpet, keeping my head down, not wanting to make eye contact with anyone, just in case they looked at me and said, "You don't belong here." The line moved slowly in front of the sign for Q through T. Even though I saw the coffee, tea, and pastries laid out on the buffet tables, all I could smell was a faint odor of disinfectant that was probably used by the cleaning crew before the crowd of lesbians swarmed the hotel. I planned to find a Starbucks after I registered and received my bag of goodies. I didn't trust hotel coffee, especially when I couldn't smell it. I'd heard the Starbucks was within walking distance from the hotel and not inside it like most places. That was probably good for me because I kept picking up those extra pounds. I was pushing at least 40 pounds over my ideal weight, according to the charts. When I reached the table, I glanced up for a brief second to give the attractive older woman sitting at the table my name. "Kathy Small," I said thickly. I hated my large tongue. Even if my physical appearance didn't give it away, which it did, my drooping eyes and my viscous speech impediment confirmed most people's quick assessment. I saw a brief moment of discomfort in the woman before she fingered through the cards and found my name badge. "And here's your ticket for the banquet." She handed me the small red ticket. "I see you're a virgin." Startled, I looked up. How in the heck did she know I was a virgin, except by assuming that someone with Down syndrome never had sex, even if they had just turned 40, like me? Huh? A conversion. You should definitely go to the session they have for conversions and connect with the buddy they assigned you to. It helps to make this experience more comfortable, she replied. My hackles went down, and I actually smiled. Thanks. I waddled away, not stalked, slinked, or scurried. When you are a dumpy, middle-aged woman who carries a lot of extra weight for your height and frame, you don't gracefully go anywhere. like they describe in all the lesbian fiction romance novels. I put my short legs in motion and headed in the direction of the hotel exit to make the trek to Starbucks. I was in desperate need of coffee at this moment. Caffeine withdrawal was a foregone conclusion, and the pounding in my head reminded me that it was way past the time I normally had my first cup. Several round tables peppered the large space. I made a beeline for an empty table off to the far right and sat down, avoiding eye contact with everyone, even the jolly woman greeting each and every person who entered the room. She laughed and hugged a few people I assumed were the assigned buddies. Her presence filled the room with warmth. I wanted to feel her arms around me. But since I'd made a large arc to avoid any other human being, that wasn't going to happen. I hoped few women would choose my table, but a couple of people ambled over. I was fiddling with my name badge, and I smiled when they sat down. I felt better when I realized they were as nervous as I was. This was a new experience to everyone in the room who wasn't a buddy. I began to feel an affinity toward these women. A tall, thin woman with close-cropped gray hair remarked, "I really debated about coming to this session, but I heard the conference organizers do a great job of making everyone feel comfortable." I nodded. The bubbly woman offering everyone hugs started to make her way to our table. She was methodically reaching out to those who had escaped her greeting when entering the room. A large woman with short, dark hair, adorable dimples when she smiled, and a cane hobbled next to the hugger. She wore thick black glasses that she pushed up against her nose in an unconscious gesture that I suspected she repeated several times a day. "Hey, Barbie, can you help me find my buddy?" "Who do you have?" "Kathy Small." I felt like a deer in someone's headlights. Barbie glanced over at my table and grinned. "Oh, she snuck by me earlier, but I was just heading over to say hello." The seat next to me was empty and Barbie plopped down. "Hiya, are you a hugger?" It's common knowledge I give the best hugs at the conference. "I like hugs," I replied. The response sounded childlike even to my own ears, and probably reinforced whatever stereotype there was about adults with Down. "You big flirt, Barbie. It's a good thing you have such an understanding wife," the woman with the cane remarked. Barbie laughed. "Hobble on over here and come and meet Kathy." She turned back to me. Rain check on the hug. "Marcy is your con virgin buddy, and she's the best." Barbie stood up and motioned for Marcy to take the chair she vacated. So many women, so little time. She seemed to float away as she made her way to the next table.
That was wonderful. It's such an observational piece. It made me feel nostalgic for the con that we didn't have this year. It's great.
No,
And
it's true.
yeah, and I so admire the diversity. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Renee, what have you selected for us to read?
I'm going to read something from the my next book that's coming out in February. I chose a very short poem and then a slightly longer poem. And my poetry tends to be a combination of the personal and the political. So the first one is mostly personal, and it's called No Love Song. This is not a love song. It's not a necklace of words strung together sweetly for our benefit. This is not a romance poem, not a tale following a formula that must end happily. This is not a guitar pulsing and racing against the strings of our needy hearts. It is not a moody saxophone vibrating inside our disaffected souls. It is a balm, a distraction from the lonely moments, a response to all the smug ones who dismiss our pleas and dispense their ineffective prescriptions when they say, "Write yourself a few poems, then call me in the morning." This is not a love song, but I'll sing the lyrics just the same. And then my other one is more of a prose poem. It's a reaction to people who are refusing to believe that COVID-19 exists, or to do the simple things that we're being asked to do so that we don't make others sick and we don't become sick ourselves. It's not, to me, it's just not a big deal to do what the scientists tell us we need to do. So this is called It Isn't, and Then It Is. It's not my grandfather's lot of unloading food and bullets headed to the muddy mustard gas-filled trenches, while images of his grandfather's back, bent under the weight of tobacco he never owned, flashed before his eyes, reminding him to leave the oyster cannery if given a second chance. It's not my grandmother's frustration, etched in chalk dust, that settled upon children's shoulders as they learned in their undersupplied, unheated Virginia classroom, and then followed her to Pennsylvania, where her color nullified her credentials and obliged her to wait tables in a tea room. It's not the yoke my father bore as he earned bed and board while studying trigonometry and German, before wearing the uniform and intercepting enemy messages from Japanese planes destined to collide with American fire over the red-stained Pacific. It's not the self-righteous anger boiling from the anti-war, poverty, racism placards hoisted above the heads of my generation to protest the napalm and knife-sharp bamboo that sliced through bloody feet in jungles thousands of miles away. It is none of those things. It is the slow torching of our sanity when we hear the senseless ramblings and the truths that disappear like wisps of smoke floating from visibility. It is the nonstop pain of absence when a loved one most needs our presence. It is the fear that keeps us company every time we leave our front door and tentatively breathe in the unknown. It is the silence in our workplace, our school, our site of worship, our familiar streets. It is the paralyzing weakness of those we counted on to be strong and resist the morally vacant command that the economy must trump people's lives. It is our head-spinning free fall into sacrificing those who are poor, old, or infirm. It is us, and we know better. We know how to be better. Will we now?
Wow, that's an amazing piece. Really strong voice there, Renee. It feels like it's different writing for you than what you've done. Am I wrong?
Well, it is. Because I haven't written poetry for a while, but that is what is emerging now during this period. That and I can tell I'm getting older because I'm thinking about people who have passed on, family members, and doing some ancestry research and investigating their past, remembering things that my parents told me about their past. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of all come together in that poem.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask both of you, how has it been writing during these tumultuous times between COVID-19 and pandemic and kind of the social explosion of Black Lives Matter and the very onerous and heavy, it feels heavy, political atmosphere we have in the country right now. How has it been for you?
I think it's fired me up. I've written more. I've been able to get a new book under contract, and that hasn't happened for me for several years. I think the enforced, I can't say aloneness because I've not been alone, but the enforced quiet from time to time has been very helpful for my thinking process.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you, Annette?
Oh, I probably have a little bit different experience. Right when COVID was just coming to be known in the world, I retired. So there was this great, wonderful change in my life. And I got to, because I was separated from my wife for many years, we were 8 hours from each other. Coming together was great. So staying at home was not hard for me because I was able to reconnect with my wife. We went to Mexico and then it really hit. And so I really have had a hard time. I haven't written a whole lot. I did manage to recently write a book with a character. The main character has autism. Mm-hmm. And that I was, on Netflix and, just spending all my time watching and not writing a thing. And this show really touched my heart with this young man who has autism. It's called Atypical. Great Netflix show if you haven't seen it. And I thought, I would really like to do something on that topic. So that got me inspired again. But other than that, just, short stories, micro stuff. I've really been more or less not necessarily writing, but just spending some time with my wife, which was needed at the time.
A lot of change all at once. Some of it good change.
Some of it good change.
Really happy change. So let's talk about the kind of the fodder for anthologies, which is the short story. You're both masterful at it. Does it feel like a different process for you, Annette, writing a short story versus writing a novel?
Oh yeah, it's a very different process. In some ways, it's a lot easier. I can usually pound out a short story in a weekend, really. But it's hard in the sense that you have to create some kind of arc within this, because I tend to blab. I just verbally vomit words, and so keeping a story to something between 5,000 and 7,000 words is really hard for me to get that full arc in. Sometimes it's easy if I'm doing, in a sense, almost like an epilogue. So I'll take characters from books that I've written and I'll continue the story a little bit. So you'll get a glimpse of the characters at Christmas time or whatever, or Halloween or whatever. And those stories are a little easier than full stories that are independent of any books I've written. Longer books, I don't have necessarily, I like the length of being able to tell the story in more words than 5,000 to 7,000. But I always get stuck in what I call the mushy middle. It's very hard for me once that peak of that arc, and then the beginning and the end, very easy. That middle is really hard for me because I'm a pantser. I just start writing and whatever comes.
And are you thinking of it in terms of 3 acts, which is the device so many people use for short stories, so that middle is your second act? Do you think of it that way?
Yeah, sort of. But again, I'm so organic in the way the words flow that I have to go back and I have to fix things all the time because there's plot holes and things that I said something there that's different from here and I can't remember what I said because I'm getting older. So it just kind of, I don't write anything down. I don't do an outline. It's a really, I have bad habits.
Well, look at the amazing results you have, however.
Developed and never corrected.
And what about you, Renee, in writing short stories? What's your process for that?
Well, to me, when I contrast it with writing a novel, it's sort of like a painter going from a mural to a miniature.
Yeah.
And I'm just fascinated by the skill that's involved, that you have to create a novel, but you're compacting it so much. You have to do your setting, your character development with such an economy of words that whole process fascinates me. Unlike Annette, I can't spin out a story in a weekend. I wish I could, but it takes me sometimes more than a week to do a story because I'll go back and think, oh, I should have said it this way instead of that way. I get caught up, I think, in the revision and in the craft of it. So I love both. I love both the novel and the short story, but in a way, I like the short story a little better.
Interesting. Are you a pantser? You are not a pantser, I would guess.
No.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, well, yeah. I'm not a plotter.
You're not a plotter.
Oh no,
But
not at all.
But are you a pantser?
Yeah, I would say so.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that about you.
Because with novels, it's my characters who sort of pull me into their story. I usually come up with a character or two before I begin, and I start constructing their backstory in my head. I don't necessarily make notes. I've never outlined a book. There's something about outlining. I mean, I never outlined a term paper. I just sort of go for it. So that's why, yeah, I'm definitely a pantster.
Okay. I feel like I know we only have an hour. I so much want to push back on that, knowing your background as a teacher. I'm sure you had a syllabus that was very stringent.
Yeah, I used quite a different technique as a teacher.
Okay.
Well, see, when I'm sitting at my processor here, I don't have to look out at 33 faces, and wonder what this one is going to do. Why is that one popping out of his seat? It's a more controlled environment.
Okay, that's good. Well, I know Annette, she and I talked a little bit via email, and I know her work background is in human resources. So you have the same kind of people looking at you askance, Annette, but they were adults.
Yeah.
Yes.
You didn't know what they were going to do either.
No.
That's right.
Humans are notoriously unpredictable.
Yes, they are. So let me pause just to let our attendees, our participants know that we welcome your questions. You can stick it in the chat room. If you want to ask a question in person, note that in the chat. Beth Burnett is in the background helping me to kind of manage your questions. So feel free to throw your questions in, and we'll get as many of them in as possible. So since we promised this was going to be about anthologies, let's talk a little bit about anthologies. Okay. So let's, I want to know from you, Annette, since you've written for more than one anthology, what's the ideal process for being a participant in an anthology? What kinds of information do you want to know? Do you want direction? Do you want to know what the other authors are writing? Do you want to have a strong sense of the theme? Tell me what your process is, or what's an ideal process for you?
As a true pantser, pretty much the way it's gone is this. Somebody asked me, hey, you want to write a story for an anthology? And I said, sure, why not? So, all the information I've really ever needed is what's the general theme of the anthology? Is there some element that has to be in the story? Like for Conference Call, it was, generally about the GCLS conferences.
Yeah.
For the Velvet anthology, it was about Velvet.
Velvet, you're all right. Yeah.
For the Lone Star, it had to be set in Texas. I just recently wrote a Halloween story that I was asked to participate in. Most of the time when I'm asked to participate, it's because I'm doing it for a charity or donation.
Yes.
I can't think of any short story that I've ever written that I've done for money. They've all been for charities. And even the ones that were not for charity, like this recent Halloween one, I said I would prefer this to go to these two charities. So I usually like to do the short stories or the anthologies for charities or giveaways. That's
very, very nice. And you just do such excellent work in the your Guardian Angel piece in the Velvet anthology was so very well accepted and reviewed, well received and reviewed. And the 40-Year Virgin, is a lot of people's favorite in the Conference Call anthology.
Oh, wow. Thank you for saying that.
I say it because it's true. Renee, you conceived of this idea for the anthology. Tell me what initiated you to do that. It's a wonderful cause and a really well-received book as well. Tell me about your thought process when you started it.
Well, a few months passed after the Pulse massacre, and one morning I was just sort of letting myself experience my feelings and my reactions. And I think I had a delayed reaction. There was that first moment when you heard it and heard about it, and you thought, oh my God, that could have been me had I been there. But the long range consequences took a while to settle in on me. And then I thought, well, if I'm having these feelings and thoughts right now, what about other writers? Surely they're having these thoughts and feelings. And so I wrote up a pretty short proposal and sent that to my friend Lee Lynch and asked her, would she be interested? And she wrote back that very evening and she said, I'm sort of busy with some projects here, so I want to think about it. So I said, fine, take your time. Well, I think another day went by and Lee sent me an email and she said, I'm in. So then, we had to talk about some of the mechanics. What kinds of pieces did we want? Did we want pieces only from lesbian writers? Mm. And even as Lee posed that question, we both said no simultaneously. There's no way I can be part of a project that I have conceived and limit it to certain people. Well, anyway, we decided men, women, trans people, it didn't really matter. And I think that what I am most proud of in that book is the diversity of the writers. I am most proud that they're not only American writers, they're from different countries, with England, Ireland, Canada, Australia. There are men, women, transgender writers, Asian, African American, white, Latina, Latino, he's a guy.
Latinx, I think, is the preferred.
I'm having trouble wrapping my arms around that because X sort of has to me a negative connotation of just Xing you out.
Oh, interesting.
And because I was a language teacher, I am not too lazy to say Latino for a male or Latina for a female. So I stay with Latino and Latina. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your question?
No, you answered it. You started talking about the process of it. I have a follow-up, however.
Yeah.
So when you were laying out the book, and I should say that I thought that the book turned out really in a very kind of celebratory way about and nostalgia about the gay bars. So even though it started as a kind of a memorial to the Pulse nightclub shooting, victims of that shooting, it had a very celebratory feel because so many of the writers had such fond memories of those times when the bars were their life support and the supportive community. That's one of the really wonderful things about that anthology, I think.
Yeah.
So when you and Lee began pulling the stories together and laying them out, what were you looking at? Were you looking for pacing? Was there any kind of organizing technique in your mind?
The only thing we knew was that we wanted short fiction or creative nonfiction. So there were quite a few memoir type pieces and poetry. And that was the only thing. We wanted good writing, of course. But we had submissions from, I think, about 71 different writers. And we were able to accept things from just about everyone. So that made me feel good as well.
That's excellent. So let's turn from anthology per se to talk about a subject that both of you have heard you speak about, and that's diversity in publishing now and diversity in women-loving women literature in general. And talk and something you brought up already, Renee. You know, the words that people want to use to be identified by. It's a new world in terms of diversity. People seem to think diversity kind of is a binary thing, but it really is a dynamic that is flowing and ebbing and changing constantly. I'd love to hear both of your views on diversity and inclusion. Let's start with Annette, who also really does a fantastic job, Annette, more so than any other writer I know in our community, of including people who are differently abled. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's kind of a passion of mine, I'm sure you can tell. Mostly because I think, you know, it seems to me like the most popular, and we really need to break that mold, I believe. That's my personal opinion. The most popular novels, the ones that sell the most, the ones that are marketed the most, are the novels that have the two beautiful women coming together and falling in love, and romance is queen. Not just romance, but romance of two beautiful people who are somewhere in their 20s or 30s. Every once in a while, we can get away with 40s, but they have to be super hot, right? And I feel like we're leaving out a lot of women. It's like, well, what about me? I'm not 20-something with a perfect figure. So not just, I don't think just, I think we need to get diversity of characters in addition to bringing in characters with persons with disabilities. I've probably written about any number of different bipolar, OCD, you know, you name it, person with Down syndrome. Now I'm tackling a person with autism because those individuals, there needs to be some education about these folks can love and have happy, healthy lives. They can get married. They can do all of those things. And it's a hard sell. I had to work very, very hard to get unconventional lovers out there because it was a story that was very unconventional with two very unconventional leads. And yeah, so sometimes you have to work hard to get those books out there because publishers, you know, they got to make money. And so I think we as a community need to have stories about individuals that are not perfect.
And reflective of the entire community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It feels so much more authentic.
Yeah.
When I saw on Twitter today, someone was announcing that Hallmark is going to do queer movies and Lifetime is going to do queer movies.
Right.
You know, and the first thing I thought about is, oh my God, it's going to be filled with tropes. You know. And,
oh yeah, it's going to be two beautiful femme women, right? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a place for that for sure. It's just
there is a place for that. I'm not knocking I love the romances. Don't get me wrong. I read a lot of them, and I love reading about beautiful women coming together. So it's not that I don't think those stories are great. I just think we have to have more stories with persons of color, with individuals, persons with disabilities.
Yes.
There's not a lot because the market doesn't support it.
And one compliment I want to give you is when you are writing about people who are differently abled, you do a wonderful job of character development that focuses against this kind of the trope that one's diverse character is their personality, one's disability is their personality. You do not do
that. Try not to, yeah. And I have to do a lot of research. There's a lot of research. You know, some of my experiences are personal, but there are some that I've had to depend on research, and it gets tough, and wanting to make sure that I represent the issues sensitively and all of that. So hopefully I've done a good job. I think I have. I usually get good feedback.
I applaud you. Renee, talk to me a little bit about your consistent through line of writing about characters of color. In all your novels that I've read, they are, your protagonist is a person of color. You recently wrote this fabulous Women in Words blog post called, let me see if I got the name of it. It was such a great name. I loved it. It was something like, okay, go ahead and tell me.
Excuse me while I burn a few bridges.
Yeah, I love that title. I love it.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about your connection and your sense of the need for diversity in our lesfic community and our women-loving women community, and why you write about it.
I guess I began writing about it because I couldn't find me in the books I was reading in the 1970s, 1980s. I could only find a few books. And so there was that need. I thought, if I have that need, I know that there are African American lesbians who would like to see themselves represented. At the same time, in each of my books, I have diverse characters. So not every character is African American. And I've written about women who are, at this point, a little younger than I am, but not the 20s and 30s, but women who are retirement age, for example, because there aren't that many books with characters, I think, in that age cohort. Asking me why I want to do this is almost like saying, why do you need to have a glass of water each day? Why do you need to breathe oxygen each day? I need this. I figure other people need this. I was a little surprised when one of my readers, who is not Black, said to me, well, I don't know what the big deal is, because I read your books and all your characters, what's Black about them? They just seem like human beings. And so I said, well, my job here is done then, because they are human beings. We have conditions with which we live that shape the way that we live. However, we're just human beings with the same emotions as anybody else. Probably I was fired up with the Black Lives Matter, with the senseless murder upon murder of African American people at the hands of police and others. And that's why I wrote that blog. I thought, every time I've come to a writer's conference, I've been asked to be on a panel or to do a presentation about racial diversity in our literature. And I thought, what good has it done? Because there still aren't many of us. And then I thought, wait a minute, yes, there are. If I leave my desk and go over to my bookcases, I see where we are. So a friend talked to me yesterday on the phone, and she said, oh, I just read that blog. I was so impressed. What kind of research did you have to do to find the names of all those Black lesbian writers? I said, not much, Karen. I just looked in my bookcase and
good for you.
Books, and that was it. I just think that we belong at the table, and we belong in the same libraries and bookstores with all other gay and lesbian writers, with all other writers, gay, lesbian, or straight.
Well, one of our participants, Joan Denman, is asking, what is the title of your forthcoming book, and when is it going to be released?
It's called what is it called now? Thanks. From a rock to between a rock and a soft place. And it's coming out in February. I don't have the exact date because my publisher hasn't set the exact date.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Annette, I read somewhere that you describe your work as an acquired taste. Why?
Because I don't stick with any sort of formula. I get a little, I get very unconventional. I try to address social issues, but my humor is a little quirky, I think, at times. And I write about a lot of different things. I've written about dragons and elves and witches and vampires and people who can bring dreams to life. And so they're very different, unconventional kinds of characters that are all over the map. You know, some of my brainstorms are just odd. A witch who can bring characters from a book to life. I mean, it's quirky and different. And so it's not your traditional woman meets woman, they fall in love, they have complications, and then they come together and end up together in the end.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't follow those patterns. Mm-hmm. And my main characters aren't always characters that would resonate with everyone. Not everybody is going to like a main character who's a young woman with Down syndrome. Not everyone is going to like a character who has severe OCD and is a little bit irritating, to be honest, in some ways because of that. Not everybody's going to like those kinds of characters because they're different. They're very different. Mm-hmm. And then some people are going to love them.
Yes.
You know? So I'm an acquired taste.
That's right. I've got a question for both of you from one of our participants who has a name I wish I could use as a character name in one of my novels, Butterfly O'Shea, who's asking what suggestions do any of the writers have for newly upcoming writers that are inclusive to all types of lesbians? You want to start, Annette? Any names come to mind? One or two?
Writers that are inclusive to all lesbians. That's a tough one because to me, one of the most underrepresented writers out there is writers who write about trans women. Mm-hmm. There's just not a lot. And I off the top of my head, and I'm getting older and I can't remember, but she did a reading at one conference and she writes great stories, but I can't remember her name. But to be honest, there aren't very many writers who write about trans issues. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about inclusivity of all different types, bisexual, transgender, I would say that most of the writers out there are very open to that, and like me as a reader, are open to reading all different kinds. But as far as getting those works into to the market, I think it's tough. Yep. To be honest with you. It shouldn't be, but it is. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me reframe the question, because Beth Burnett is saying to me that maybe Butterfly is asking a different question than I framed it. Maybe she's asking for, Butterfly is asking for tips on how to be inclusive as a new writer. Let me throw that to you.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I misinterpreted the question. I think using inclusive language, I've seen a lot of posts and Facebook stuff about, talking about lesfic, and that's not an inclusive term. Yet it's a term that most people recognize, so it's hard to get away from that completely. So sometimes if you add things like WLW, women loving women, that makes it a bit more inclusive. So I think it's about terminology.
Yeah, it's a lot about terminology.
Yeah, so adding both probably is important. And I don't know what other kind of terminology, how do I describe my work? It is women loving women. It's also lesfic, it's lesbian fiction. I mean, it's both of those. I have not personally written with characters who are bisexuals. I certainly have had gay men. I'm trying to think if I've had trans women or trans men characters. I don't think I have, because other people do that much better than me. But just the terminology, I think, being more inclusive in the terminology, and I don't know the keys to that, to be honest. Renee might.
Yeah, well, Maria Pena has made the suggestion that Rachel Gold is certainly an author who does write about.
That's the one, Rachel Gold.
Excellent at it. And Rachel also has some really fine resources on terminology that you can find on her website. So I invite all of you to look at there. Renee, what tips would you have for a new writer about making sure their language and their topics and the material is inclusive in our community?
The first thing I would say is to put yourself out there and meet people who are different from you. Now, it's hard to do that right now with COVID, but perhaps online you could do that. Do some exploration. Groups on Facebook, for example, trans groups or people with disabilities. Enter into some dialogues with people to try to make some connections in that way. Like Annette, I have not had that many personal experiences with people who have disabilities. And so I would have to try to meet someone, because I think you can't beat that primary resource and just asking people, well, what's it like for you to go to the supermarket? You can also find some books yourself, both fiction and nonfiction, and do a lot of reading.
I'd like to ask both of you a question. We have about 8 minutes. We welcome your questions in the chat room, and we'll make sure we get them in. But I'd like to ask both of you what your perspective is on this, on the whole Own Voices movement. Do you feel like you have to only write what you know? Can you be a writer, Renee, who writes about, say, the Jewish experience? Or Annette, you are a writer who writes about differently abled people without having that specific experience yourself. Why do you feel compelled to do that? I'd like to ask both of you that.
I think very selfishly, if I set out to write a story or a book about a character who represents a different race, different ethnicity, it's going to sort of force me out of my shell and force me to learn. And I've discovered during my retirement how dear learning is to me. Learning about people, learning about other subjects I never had a chance or time to learn about. So that would be how I'd begin my answer. Maybe Annette can pick up from there.
Yeah, why don't you pick it up, Annette?
Yeah, I would agree with her. It helps me to learn. I mean, I have had some personal experience in some of the topics. Certainly, my cousin had Down syndrome, and I have my mother was OCD, and my sister's bipolar. So there's some of those that I have had some personal, not all. But liking to learn about, I made an attempt. I don't know if it was a great attempt or not, but I have written one Latina character and one African American. It was a historical novel. I probably let the writers, the persons of color, write their experiences because they do a better. To be perfectly honest, I think there are probably a lot more authors who are persons of color who could do a better job. So I haven't spent as much time on that, whereas I think the representation for persons with disabilities is much less, to be honest.
One of our participants, Ann Hart, is saying, asking any recommendations for finding sensitivity readers. Do both of you use sensitivity readers in your work?
I've been a sensitivity reader. I've not used a sensitivity reader, but I think it's an excellent idea. Does GCLS have something set up with writers who also agree to be sensitivity readers?
Are you asking an ethical?
Yes. Does I'm asking you, Cheryl?
Yes.
Does GCLS
Yes.
have a resource?
We do. In the membership directory, all members are asked whether they would consider being a sensitivity reader, and many of them have checked that box.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest people looking for sensitivity readers start there. There are also several websites. There's a debate about whether sensitivity readers should be paid or not. I think they should probably be paid in most instances, but within our community, we certainly can barter and negotiate, and within our relationships within GCLS, I think you could find sensitivity readers who won't require a fee. I've certainly done it for our members. Yeah. So let me, we've got 4 minutes, and I'm going to put you guys on the spot just a little bit. I want to, and so your answers have to be brief. Is there a question you would want to ask Annette? And Annette, is there a question you would want to ask Renee in our platform tonight? How about that for putting you on the spot?
Oh my gosh.
Annette, do you have certain sources of inspiration?
Certain sources of inspiration. The people around me, the people that I have met, like I said, my cousin was a source of inspiration. My mother, I wish she would have been alive when my first novel came out, but she was just such an avid reader that I think she was a source of inspiration.
Okay.
And question.
So, question for you.
Right.
So poetry. I'm fascinated by poetry. I haven't read a lot of poetry. Do you prefer writing poetry over writing short stories? Or
I prefer writing short stories, then in second place novels, and in third place poems. But whatever comes to me is what I'm going to write.
Those are 2 excellent questions, actually. I love that. As we're closing out, I want to remind people of our next book. If I can pull it up on my screen, you're going to probably see some weird stuff on my screen, but just bear with me because I'm going to share my screen and go to the spot where I want to find this. And you're going to see a couple of dogs, but it's going to all be good. Let's see. So this is okay. Here's our September book club selection. It's a nonfiction book, and we haven't done a nonfiction yet. House on Fire, Jen T. Grace, and I hope you guys will come back in September and participate in that. I want to thank you, Renee, and I want to thank you very, very much, Annette, for your wonderful responses. It was great to hear your voices. You were wonderful at letting me throw surprises at you. We didn't spend much time talking about what questions we would do, and you were both just excellent.
Thank you.
And, thank you very much. It was an honor to be a part of this. Thank you for asking me.
Let me just, one last question. Where can we find you on social media? Throw out your tags and your Twitter tags and all that.
On Facebook, it's just Renee Bess.
Okay.
And on Twitter, it is Renee Bess 1.
Okay.
The number 1.
And you, Annette?
Annette Mori 0859, and WordPress, Twitter, Facebook. And if I can give a quick plug, One Shot at Love just came out on August 1st. So hopefully you'll check that book out.
That's excellent. We will look for both your books coming up. But thank you, everybody who dialed in tonight and participated in the book club. We really appreciate you. And good night, ladies. And I'll talk to you both really soon.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Wonder what she looked like.